Hi there, and welcome back to another episode at Station Road. Now, finally, I have some content to be able to share with you guys relating to this disused viaduct. So, you may have caught my brief little update video about a week ago, which was just sort of touching base, letting you all know where I'm at and how busy things have been down here, that I really haven't obviously had the chance to be able to do any further work on the Station Road layout. So this week I finally had that window of opportunity to sort of get into the remainder of this disused viaduct, and of course, as I mentioned in that short wee update, was of course adding some additional overgrowth and foliage, some of the more larger bushier items. So I think rather than hold you in any more suspense, let's just get into what I got up to. So before we actually jump into applying some of this wilderness and overgrown foliage to the viaduct, I thought it best to take a look at some of the materials that I'm going to be using during this process. So there's quite an array of different things going on here, so I think let's just go through and see what I'm going to be using. So we'll start with this great big clump of matted fibre here. Now this is the remnants of a hanging basket, so this is the kind of material you actually get from garden centre, possibly even a hardware store. Now this is in New Zealand. I'm assuming you can probably get it elsewhere around the world, but this is essentially coconut fibre. So it's been matted into a sort of a basket shape, but I've hence sort of pulled it to pieces and so forth. Now this is probably very similar, from what I understand, to horsehair, which seems to be a readily available material in the UK, but I don't think it's just not a common thing here in New Zealand. So this is what I'm using, the coconut fibre. So these are pretty cheap from garden centres and so forth, and you can just tease this all apart. So we've got that there. The next item that we're going to be using is this stuff here. Now this has a couple of names. Now the main name I sort of refer to this as is roving wool, or it can be called roving yarn or roving felt, and it is essentially a wool fibre, and this is pre-dyed, so it's not the stuff you find in your cushions, that synthetic polyfibre stuff where you then have to dye it yourself. This is actually a wool type material, and it's pre-dyed, and you can actually get them in various shades. That's quite a dark brown, almost sort of a black brown, and then in here we've got quite a light brown colour here, and then in a bag here. So this is the actual product that I purchase, and I can't remember where I get this from. I think I might get it from an online store, but I'm not quite sure. It's called Clover Natural Wool Roving, and this one here is quite a, well, it's probably in between. So this is a mid brown, so it's in between these ones, and as you can see, it's, you know, once you get out of the bag, there's actually quite a lot here. There's loads. You can make 1,000 bushes with this stuff. So, and the great thing about it is you can tease it apart. You can make it as loose or as tight as you want. So that's that there. What else have we got here? This is just another type of the coconut fibre, but this is a more sort of a dense fibre, and I have used this material before to make kind of more rambled hedges, not manicured hedges, but more sort of rustic hedges, and this stuff actually works really well for that. And I'll pop a link in the top corner for when I worked up some hedges using this stuff. We have in here all sorts of different scatters, so this is really sort of a blend of all sorts of different scatters in there that it's kind of leftover stuff that I've gathered up. We've got sort of another blend here with sort of greens and speckledy colours. So these scatters, of course, as you can imagine, these will be sprinkled over the roving yarn or this coconut fibre once a bush has been sort of formed into shape. So that's another scatter there. And then we do have some pre-made stuff that I'm going to use as well. So in here, and I think this is Woodland Scenic's Dry Brown Briar Patch, which is sort of a dead type material, and it comes in sort of bunches, and it looks pretty good. So it can be sort of manipulated and used in various ways as well, whether they're large or small bushes. So there's that stuff there. And then in these boxes here, now this is called Tajima. It's actually a UK company, and I have used these before. These have featured on other videos, and these are sort of pre-made little shrubs and bushes, and they're actually self-adhesive, so you can actually just peel them off and stick them on, but they actually look quite realistic. I quite like these. So there's various different kinds of these. So we've got, what was that called? I think they've got names on them somewhere. No, it doesn't, but there's smaller versions, different colours. And what have we got in this one here? That's sort of a dead type one there, quite good. They look very realistic. And what else is there in here? And that's a sort of the green version of it as well. So they do look really good. So that's some of the materials. So the idea is, because I'm going to be populating this already modelled viaduct with its finishes and weathering and so forth, the plan is I'm going to sort of partially pre-assemble clumps of bushes and overgrowth and then attach it, because if I sort of put this down, a clump of this somewhere on the viaduct, and then I have to use the spray fixative or whatever before I can do the sprinkling, then that fixative is going to just end up on everything else. So the idea is to sort of form shapes to a sort of a basic shape, and then do all the scatters and so forth that are going on top of the base material, and then once that's all dried, then I'll actually position these bushes in place. Now with this stuff here, this coconut fibre, I'm going to try something out, something new. I haven't tried it before, and I'm just going to see how it works. The same goes with this roving yarn as well, roving wool. I'm going to try something with that as well, which is a little bit different. So I think with all of that sort of covered now, I think it's really just a case of getting into it and a little bit of experimentation, and we'll see how it goes. Right, so we're going to make a start with the materials that I've just run through and establish a little bit more full-on vegetation and overgrowth in various areas on this track bed. So we're not going to go hard out, it's just in some random places. And of course, one of the things that I really want to address is the elephant in the room here, which is this blotch down here. Now when I look at that, I think, as I've mentioned before, I suspect these are my paw prints, and these would have been something on my hands or fingers that have gone on here, and then once I've gone over this with the clear varnish, it's actually reacted with it, and of course highlighted these blotches here, which don't look brilliant. I could probably get away with that one there, because that could be something seeping down from this bit of parapet here, but these two here, they're just not, they don't belong, in other words. So we're going to take a look at this first and see what we can do to have some some kind of foliage that's busting out through the actual brickwork. Now I do have some examples of this which I'll pop up on the screen, and it clearly shows that it does happen. You do get vegetation that manages to cling into maybe eroded brickwork and starts to make its way up the wall. So what I'm actually going to use for this material is some of this roving yarn or roving wool, felting wool. Of course, it's got all sorts of various names, and the plan is what I'm going to do is fashion and shape the roving wool up the side of the viaduct, and of course it's going to wrap around and over the top, so it's going to look like, I mean that looks ridiculous at the moment, but it's going to look like something's growing up here, and it's also got a hold in on the track bed as well, so it's quite a significant sort of clump of foliage that's taken hold in this particular area. So the plan is, because I don't want to actually get any more sort of layering sprays, or as I use a matte clear varnish for when it comes to sprinkling the scatter materials, I don't really want that all going all over the viaduct. So the idea is I'm going to shape this into something that I'm kind of happy with, and then what I've actually got here, and it's probably a bit hard to put in the shot, it's just a bit of MDF nailed to a chunk of wood, and the idea is that then I'm going to transpose this over to here gently, work on it on here, add the scatter, the spray fixatives and all of that kind of thing, and then position it back in here afterwards. So that's the plan. So we're just going to start by looking at how we can shape this so that it sort of looks like something's coming up here, and it may not cover the whole thing, so where it's sort of embedded into the brickwork with that dark stain that's there, maybe that's sort of water damage and so forth, and we can just start to build this out a bit. Now what I've found with this roving yarn or roving wool is not to go too dense with it, is to actually make it look quite airy, and so it doesn't look like it's got too much sort of space in between all the fibres. So I've just got a pair of tweezers here too that I'm going to use to tease this apart a little bit. And of course at the moment, because I'm not fixing this to the viaduct, it's going to look a little bit more bushy than what it will once I've glued this and actually squashed it down a bit. So there might be, maybe there's a stream that's coming off up this way a little bit, and maybe another sort of part coming off here. So the other technique as well is, if there's just too much, then of course I can get the scissors out and give it a bit of a haircut. So we might just put a little bit more up here, because I really sort of want it to look like possibly this overgrowth started up here on the track bed, and then of course it's self-seeded, it's ended up working its way down the side of the viaduct. So I'm kind of thinking something like that, and then we can sort of tease it into place once we've glued it. So we've got that sort of shape there. So very carefully we're just going to take that out and just gently wrap it over the edge. So that's the shape sitting on our makeshift area. Now we can actually see, you know, there's little bits in here, maybe I might pluck them out, and that's our sort of approximate shape that we want, and I can sort of work that in. But at least we know now that this is how far down it needs to come down the wall. So that's the main sort of shape we want to get that area in. So one of the things that you probably noticed on the screen here is these little tufts here. Now this was part of my cunning plan, which I kind of feel like it's no longer cunning. I'll just move that out of the way for now, These are the coconut fibres, and I used a technique where I stretched out strands of this coconut fibre, bent it over a bit of wire, and then threaded it through a hole in some cardboard, and then super glued the base of that on the underside, and then pulled the fibres up, and then added scatter, and also had a crack at adding some of this roving yarn around it. And in the end, I kind of feel like it just didn't really look right. So what I'm planning on doing is, I put these ones in here just to see how they looked, and I'm not entirely happy, but what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to poke in bits of this material here. Now this is a Woodland Scenics product, so this is the briar patch, and what I'm going to do is just add to it, and I think straight away adding these here to the top of this is changing it completely and giving it a much more realistic look. So that's what I'm going to do for there. So what we'll do is I'm going to take this through into the garage, and we're going to start blasting this with some layering spray, and we're going to add some scatter to it. So I've now coated the roving wool with the scatter, and of course using the Boyle's matte clear varnish that actually works quite well as a layering spray. But while that's drying, what we'll do is we'll just get on and actually do a little bit more of this type of overgrowth or foliage. So using the same roving wool material, I was sort of thinking about having some kind of random areas of wool that maybe we've got some clumps of, you know, bushes or something, overgrowth that's sort of spread around, but I don't want to go too far with this. So for example, you know, maybe there's a bit there, and I thought maybe down here, and I might just need to adjust the camera, is popping something definitely down here where these buttresses are. So we're just going to have to shift the camera. So I kind of feel like that's quite a common sort of spot where you would find these rather more overgrown areas of foliage in areas like this. So maybe it sort of stretches out a little bit beyond there, something like that maybe. And of course I'm not too worried much about the shape at the moment, because it's hard to judge until you actually put the scatter on how the shape is actually going to look. The main idea is to try and not make these look like they're somebody's manicured garden bushes. So maybe a tuft, it's possibly out of camera view now, but a tuft down here. I'm thinking definitely more sort of tufts and overgrowth on this side of the viaduct, on the side where the track has actually been partially lifted, because obviously this side of the viaduct has been out of use longer than that side. So there's definitely needs to be more kind of growth on this side. And so the plan here, once again similar to this piece that's going to be running down here, is I'll then take these tufts off and just put them on a bit of timber or scrap card or something, and do all the scatter on that, and then bring them back and put them back in position. So as you can see, you don't really use a great deal of this. You know, I'm still tearing away at this little piece here. So there's a whole container full of this stuff. So this stuff goes a long way. So I think we'll leave it at that for these. So what I'll do is carefully take these off, put them on a bit of card, and do the same process that I did for this piece down here. Right, so I've now finished applying scatter to all these roving wool clumps that I'd pre-arranged on the track bed, and what I actually found is, you know, we've got another one here, is I started out just laying them out in card, and of course there's a bit of a breeze outside though, so they started blowing everywhere. And then of course the other issue is that when you start spraying them, of course they move about. So what I actually did is placed a bit of paper over some high density foam, shoved some toothpicks in, and poked these wall type clumps on top of it, stop them from moving around, and also meant when I was carting these outside they weren't just going to end up blowing down the path. So I think that sort of works quite well, and I think we can just pull these toothpicks out. So they sort of look okay, they've come out reasonably okay, and there's still the opportunity to manipulate them. So they're still just drying off. Really want them to dry off completely, and they sort of go a little bit stiff once they're fully dry, and which is a good thing because it sort of means that it's all reasonably secure in terms of the scatter. So what we're actually going to get on with is go back to this piece that we'd made here and just popped on here. So what we'll do is we'll take this off the edge of here, and we're just going to place it up here. I need to squish it down into that and just see what we're looking at down here. So there's clearly quite a bit here that we can actually get rid of in terms of, matter of fact, that can go up. So there's even actually more that can, matter of fact, I might just pull this bush out because I never liked it, and we can sort of wrap this over this edge a bit. And the plan is, what I'm going to do is actually just glue these in place with some PVA glue. So something like that, but it clearly needs a little bit of work on it and trimming. So what I might do is, some of these areas I'm actually going to pull out, which may need a pair of scissors, because it'll be kind of interesting to sort of have strands. And of course the other thing too is I don't really want to squash it too much, because then it sort of looks like it has been, you know. So we've got a bit there, and maybe there's a piece that's coming out around the side there, and I don't know, maybe it wraps around there. I don't think it will. I think that's going to look a little bit silly. So we might just, and trying to cut these pieces off so that it doesn't look too even looking, so that they've got at least sort of a little bit of a ragged edge to it. And what I was going to do is cut through this piece here. So, you know, we're starting to get it to sort of go out in various directions, like so, something like that. And then of course once I've glued this on and it's dried, then I can actually tug at it and tease it and pull it a little bit further as well. And I may have to go over with maybe touching up with some scatter here and there, but I'll probably can just use a bit of glue and sort of brush it on as carefully as possible and touch it up. But I think that's the bulk of that part actually where I sort of want it. So I'm going to spread glue on the underside of this, and I'm just using PVA glue. Now this is not in shot but I'm just running beads of PVA over the back of this. So effectively what we've got is beads of glue on the back, and then we're just going to carefully put that in there. Now I haven't put any glue on this top half up here, so I've actually deliberately left the glue off that because I sort of want to try and manipulate that a little bit more, I think. Now what comes in handy at this point is some meat skewers. So these are just throwaway bamboo meat skewers, and it sort of helps. You can push this down but without squashing the whole thing, and you can also just sort of tease it about a little bit. So I think we've got that in place for now. I want to let that glue set and go off, and then what I can do is get in behind little bits, add in little bits of glue here and there where I feel it's a little bit loose, and I think up here, and then I'm going to sort of cut into this a little bit so that it kind of looks like it's spread out a little bit. So we've got a similar effect, but it's on the trackbed side. So what we can do is we can get on and actually look at some of this stuff up here, and I think what we'll do is we'll grab these ones here, and of course I've got to remember where they went, so we're just going to actually pull these out, and of course these are just toothpicks that I've used, and of course I put the paper down on the styrene or on this high density foam because, as we know, the spray varnish melts polystyrene, so hence that's why that's in there now. I think that one was in there, and that one was in that position there. Now, just trying to remember where I put this one. I'm not quite sure now. Can't remember where I had these placed. Should have taken a photograph. I thought to myself, I must take a photograph of the position of these bits of roving wall. And did I? Of course I didn't. Why would I do that? So I think that one was about there somewhere, and I know, I think maybe that was, I know that one was about there. That one was down there somewhere. So anyway, I'm just sort of roughly positioning where they are, and once again what I'm actually going to do is the same process as what we've got on this area here, is PVA glue, blob it on the bottom of the underside of these and just stick them down, and then once they're dry, then I'm going to sort of go around and lift the edges and give that a good glue so that they're nice and secure. So I think for the sake of that, it's pretty straightforward. I will just go ahead and do this off camera and come back when it's probably ready for this to take it the next step and work it into the trackbed here on the top. Right, so I'm now got back to working on this, and I'm just fine-tuning it a little bit, and got a couple of glue beads up here that never made it to a surface. Now this PVA glue, it kind of dries clear, mostly clear, so although you can see it at the moment, it's kind of becomes invisible. I'm reasonably happy with that. I mean, it's pretty full on, but it's kind of what I was after. It's in between those two photos I showed earlier, where one was actually pretty crazy and the other one was kind of quite thinned out. This is sort of that balance in between, and I may actually do some other areas in different parts of this viaduct, so it's not just that piece, maybe there are some other bits that are creeping down. So we'll carry on fixing some of these into place. Now this one here is quite large. I'm just wondering whether I might swap these around and have the smaller one in there, because the idea is, as I mentioned earlier, this track might have been used at a later date, and so this, I wouldn't expect this track to be as fully overgrown as this side, so I'm kind of thinking I might shove the smaller one in there, and just wondering which way around it might go. So what we'll do is I'm going to stick all of these in place, and I think we'll call it a day for this episode, otherwise it just gets too long. And once I've got these in place, then we can take an overall view of it. So there we have it for the disused viaduct at this stage. Now, as I mentioned in the video, I'm going to add a little bit more foliage to the outer walls of the viaduct in some other areas, so it doesn't just look like there's one area where that overgrowth is. And I may thin that overgrowth out just a little bit. I'm just sort of debating whether it's too much, but I'll add some additional areas of this and then sort of gauge from there whether I need to thin that down. So I think it's certainly very much taken shape now, and it is certainly looking like an abandoned railway viaduct. And of course what I may actually do is add a few people in there, like some people trekking along the viaduct. And there's possibly some other bits and pieces. I've got to possibly do maybe a bit of fly tipping and a bit of discarded junk that people have dumped on the trackbed and so forth. But as a whole, the trackbed, I feel like it's really at a near completed stage. So as you know, two of the reasons why it's just taken me so long to complete this viaduct is, of course, one, I got sidetracked by the scratch-built signal box build, and then of course there was a little bit of a sidetrack with the Rapido trains 15XX and all the issues that I've had with that. But also another little wee project that I kind of got sidetracked on was doing my own parts drawers, which are actually behind the camera at the moment, and these were all laser cut. So I designed them up myself and laser cut them out and assembled them all, and the idea behind it was basically I wanted something to fit perfectly on this new bench top that I've added in here to the office, so I've got a little bit more modelling and working space. So I think these have certainly come out pretty well, and I've yet to actually populate them obviously with all the parts, but I know that you can buy pre-made drawers and so forth, the plastic ones. I used to have some plastic ones there, but they were never really any good. They were pretty cheap, pretty crappy, and really I couldn't find anything that would actually fit in that space. So basically I just made my own. So we'll leave it there for today's video. I certainly hope you've gained some inspiration and ideas for your own layouts, and you know, maybe looking at this roving yarn, roving wool, all that type of thing. I think it's a great product and it's very effective. So do take care everyone, look after yourselves. Of course, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will catch you next time. Bye for now.